Good afternoon, and welcome to the August meeting for the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority for Harrisburg. Elaine Barber is not with us today, but the rest of the members of the board are present, so we do have a quorum. We have our ex officio from the budget department, Mike Wood here, and Mike Cassidy, general counsel. We are awaiting Marita, but we will continue nonetheless. We just realized that we have a couple of mistakes on our agenda, namely the dates for the minutes that unfortunately were not distributed. So it doesn't really matter that the dates were wrong because now we're not going to vote on them. So next month we will vote on the approval of 3 sets of minutes and we will get the dates correct. So that takes this will be a short meeting at this point. I have a few comments and we'll have some discussion, and if Marita doesn't come, we may end before she gets here. Thank you, Ralph, for presiding over the meeting last month. I understand you covered a lot of ground because you had reports not only from Marita, but Brian and Dan Hartman as well. And I did get to read the minutes, so I do know what happened, so thank you. And since that meeting, we did meet jointly with the audit committee for the city of Harrisburg to hear a report on the city's 2021 audit, and that's not a typo. And that was the final year of the Papenfuse administration, and as such is really not reflective of the Williams administration. And it was pretty much, I would say, the same as results as the 2020 audit, with possibly one more finding in the single audit, but the same sort of recommendations. I know that, Marita, I know that that it is Brian's goal to have the 2022 audit have a 2023 date on it. So we'll see. It's very optimistic, but hopefully with the new Munis system, that'll help a lot. And as we all know, earlier this year, we granted a permanent change to the submission date for the city's annual update to the 5-year financial plan. And that date is August 31st of each year. And Marita has assured us it would be submitted on time. I'd like to take just a minute to review the timeline so all of us can be alert to the demands on our time. So after the city submits its report, the ICA has 30 days to respond. Fortunately, our September meeting falls within that date, so we won't need to call an extra meeting, and so that'll be the bulk of the discussion at the September meeting. And as you remember, we have 2 options. We can approve or disapprove with explanations and requests for changes. If we approve, the submission will stand as submitted until 2024. If we disapprove, the city will have 15 days to respond. And then likewise, the ICA will have 15 days to respond to the city's submission, and that continues until issues are resolved. And so that, I think, gives us a sense that September will be spent reading, reviewing. October could be spent back and forth, and we may need to have another meeting. So we'll have a pretty good sense at the September meeting whether or not we think we should schedule another meeting in addition to our traditional October meeting. And as you know, the ICA will ask the controller of the city of Harrisburg to render an opinion on the city's assumptions and projections to help in our review. I've been in touch with the controller's office and they are on standby. And Marita, the one thing we want to remember is that when you submit, we need that chief fiscal officer attestation letter.
You mean the mayoral?
Right, yeah, well, it says chief fiscal officer, and I think since technically she is, that's what we used last time. It just in the act itself, it says chief fiscal officer. Are there any other comments regarding the actual submission, deadlines, timelines, all that?
Just from past experience, Madam Chair, we're meeting on Wednesday, September 27th. And then if for some reason there's not an immediate approval of the draft that was submitted, that's coming up on the 31st, we would then do some sort of correspondence to the city sort of between Wednesday and Friday of that week to get them a response or.
Right.
Because usually we talk it out at the meeting and then the board authorizes
Right.
you and I to
Right,
put together some sort of written response.
exactly.
So that would be the 28th, the 29th, at most, October 2nd, and then we have the 15 days later, we'd have to come back a second time, so
Well, they come back.
they
and
come
then-
back to us.
And then 15.
15 days that we'd have to come back,
Right.
so.
And I do think that Jeffrey and I will talk as soon as we get the submission. And perhaps try and frame a request to board members on responses and opinions, like maybe an overall opinion, a couple reactions, and then specific, something that allows us to, Jeffrey, to consolidate, send back out before the meeting, so we have a good sense of what we're gonna be discussing.
Madam Chairman, do we have a date set yet for the October meeting?
Yes, we do have a regular meeting date, which is October 25th. Wednesday, October 25th is our regularly scheduled meeting.
Thank you.
The only question would be, would we need some other date
Yeah,
in addition to or in lieu of?
right.
So we'll have to let the chair play that by ear.
And I think so, just everyone bring their calendars to the September
Because
meeting.
I do have a travel schedule in the October. I've got to double check on the dates and again in November, late in the month.
Okay,
And if there's a forum in person, you can participate via Zoom.
except if it's a vacation, you
Try
don't.
to.
Well,
Who
so
knows?
maybe if everyone can send those to Jeffrey, let's figure out if there's a conflict sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
We
you
can
just send the
reschedule.
email by email.
We at one point talked about rescheduling this meeting, but realizing that it's August, we decided that next week is Labor Day weekend. So let's just stick with it. Finally, I wanted to note that we received both the DCED report filed by the city and the controller's report for the month of July. And Jeffrey has given us each copies of these, so they're at your place. In the DCED report, I noted that expenses exceeded revenue for the month by 2.3 million, leaving a general fund cash balance of 20.6. And this is compared to a 16.7 million fund balance, which is reported on the controller's report. And that is net of encumbrances. So that's why it is lower. And I think it's important for us to continue to monitor this, as the controller's earlier letter this year thought that the city was perhaps being a little too optimistic relative to revenue in 2023. So we'll want to keep an eye on that for the last third of the year. And then if you look at the yearly total relative to where we stand in comparison 2022 and 2023, you'll note that there's a significant decrease, and that's important to remember. That was the ARPA money that was transferred as revenue replacement. So that just makes it look weird, but I don't see any alarm there. On the neighborhood services fund, I need some insights into the numbers reported by the controller. And you can see that on page. It's actually the back of the second page that's there. And the annual totals are nearly identical when you look at year-to-date revenue. but the categories are wildly distorted. As an example, collections for 2023 show 852,000, while it shows 3.5 million for the same period in 2022. So the controller is picking up different numbers somewhere, and I'm gonna wanna clarify that unless someone here knows what that is. It was pretty funky, is the word I would use. But I'll follow
I don't
up,
have any input on the controllers.
Right.
So I don't,
but so I'll follow up to find that out, because I think we wanna clarify, because I like to tie lines together, and that'll help us figure out what's going where. Those were all the observations I had. Did anyone else have any things that struck them as they reviewed these documents? And I think always feel, welcome to contact Jeffrey to ask for explanations in case there's something, or we can also beneficially ask for explanations from the controller's office or from Brian or Marita if there's other numbers we don't understand. And we originally had an update from Marita on the schedule, but also realized that you gave a pretty comprehensive report last month and are working on the financial plan this month. So I will turn it over to you, but we'll also understand if you say, I have nothing to say.
well, if you received period 7 from Brian,
The DCD,
Which one is the period, so.
the DCD report, you mean?
that's-
This one, yes, that's one on our desk.
That's the most exact, you can, go ahead. So.
He has all the,
yeah, it's the same amount, 22,918,754. I just printed out Brian's report that he gives to me.
It's in there.
I see it now,
Yeah.
yes.
yeah, but I mean, he also did all the, Jeffrey did all the attachments, no?
Right, the attachments are here,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm looking at, so specifics. So the fund balance at the end of July was 22,918,000. And I think you have a list of
That was 22 million was at the end of June, right?
no, July 23rd.
Yeah, but if we look at 16, it's 20,572.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at the beginning of it
Yeah.
instead of the ending, my apologies, sorry.
No problem.
And then the ending balance is 20,572,918. So we had 2,677,000 in revenue and 5,023,000 in expenditures. We reported deficit of 2,345,000. Most likely we got the Luxorma fee that we have to pay for disposal, and that usually jumps the cost up quarterly. That's why you see that jumping up so high, but then it kind of evens out after that. And that's neighborhood services fund.
Yes.
And but I think that the July 31st general fund revenue reports are on the controller's reports. You have the total revenues received, as you just stated, Ms. Carter. And Chair Carter, sorry. And and the expenditures are listed as well. Through July 31st of 2021. And the only thing we expect is, in the coming months, we'll see the ARPA fund transfers coming into the general fund for the various projects that are scheduled for 2023. And then I guess additional one, I'm sure additional ones in 2024. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to.
Simple question. I know originally we were thinking there might be another 1,000,001 or something that could be recouped for revenue. Did city council spend all that from the ARPA? remember when we were originally looking at the monies, there was another 1.3 or something that you could have recouped because you had 8.6. And
Well, the entire amount for the Act 5 is revenue.
But there was no excess revenue.
no, but what I'm saying is, we did the 8.3 last year.
Right.
And technically, there would have been up to 10 million that the city could have recouped.
A
Correct.
total of 31 million, which is what they used for the ARPA, to fund the ARPA. So it's all revenue loss. The entire thing is revenue loss.
They're allowed to claim, I think I.
But
We're
it's
allowed
not-
to claim 20, 21, 22,
Sorry.
yeah.
But it's that it's unrestricted. I guess that's my point. The true revenue replacement. Like the like coming from a fundraising background, I get myself unrestricted and unrestricted. I think. you
I think I
understand.
understand, but let me ask,
Okay.
try to rephrase it, see if I'm getting at it. When the categories are set for the revenue replacement by the US Department of the Treasury, did it say that the city can claim up to a certain amount of ARPA funding each year as revenue replacement? They set a number. So you're saying there is a larger number they could have claimed. My understanding is they only had so much actual ARPA funding left over. So even though they could have claimed more, they didn't actually have any more. So they couldn't fill up the full bucket of revenue
Right.
replacement. It's-
And-
They just,
And
Act
that's,
5 expended every
Yeah.
dime that
and that's
they
why
had
it
left.
said that city council appropriated, they designated it.
Right,
When the mayor did her original proposal,
right.
there was still money left over that was undesignated.
And I think everything's designated by.
But
Act
then
5.
city,
Every-
yeah,
Every
but-
penny.
Every penny. is-
right,
All
There's
31
no,
million.
there's
Yeah.
no extra money left over,
Right.
unfortunately.
right.
But they did it under revenue loss, so they had less restrictive reporting.
Correct.
I
That's the
assume,
fact.
Yes,
I
right,
mean,
no,
I'm
that
not
I
a policy
understand.
decision maker, so I'm not, I assume that was their rationale.
Right.
I remember what you're talking about now.
Okay, I'm sorry for
No,
that.
no, no,
Convoluted,
you were
yeah.
very, you were accurate, we're just talking a different day.
Andy always says I go from here to here, and he's like, you made 3 turns and forgot to tell me.
Well, some of it, we didn't have the expenditures to use for that. So
Right.
that's why we had it left over, but it's not that we would have if we had the related expenditures, but we did
No.
not. But we do now, we can roll that 1 million into the remaining.
Right.
amount, which is how we got the 31 million versus 30. If that helps.
That's all in.
Yeah, got it. Anything else? Not?
I have,
I don't have anything
Oh,
else.
I just have
Unless you
2
have
things I'd like to, from the last meeting, which I'd like to bring to your attention. They're not action items, but they might raise questions. We talked a little bit about collections. We had a really good discussion about collections in the neighborhood services fund at the last board meeting. And one of the things that came to light, and I brought it up, but I wanted to sort of underline it for you all at this meeting, is that the city charges by policy a reoccurring compounding late fee on accounts, which is not how other municipalities all do it. That is how, for example, private debts are often handled. So you owe X and then they add Y to it for being late. And then in the next period, it's the sum of X and Y that they then calculate a new debt owing. So it's compounding over time. And if you don't pay in that month, in the next month, it grows even more and so on, which might seem logical to you, but in municipal debts, that's actually more unique. Because what you're doing is you're taking a bad debt, something you may or may not ever collect, and it keeps growing larger and larger over a period of time. So you're increasing on your books what you're carrying at, which might be an uncollectible debt, but you're showing it growing because you keep compounding the interest on it. So eventually, what may be close to impossible debt carries a very large number. But it's just as impossible as it was when it started, if you may not be able to collect that for whatever reason, because some debts are just hard to collect. That is a policy decision that's historic, it goes back several administrations. But it's not a requirement, and it somewhat exacerbates the story of bad debt. Because you're growing it, saying, well, last month it was X and now it's Y, and the next month it's Z, and it keeps growing. And therefore your expectation of collection of it grows too. Even if it's not necessarily collectible. So that's the first thing, which I didn't know until the last meeting. And
That
that,
was the outcome.
that was- no, the last regular sitting of the board, I asked the question and Mr. Grover and Mr. McCutcheon made that clear. That's the that is the longstanding policy of the city, that those bad debts will grow in size over time. And I can see the logic of it, but it does, we're always concerned about how much is the receivable, how big a receivable it is. Your next logical question might be, how much of that really large receivable is interest
Yeah,
on the original bad debt as opposed to the debt itself. Now, if I was in the private sector, it's lack of use of available money, and that's the right thing to do, because you're in essence taking your customers, extending them credit, so they should pay you every month a little bit more to that. But in municipal government, I'm just letting you know, that's more unique. Usually it's a late fee, you owe us some money, we charge a late fee, and that's it. It doesn't keep growing, it's no compounding of the debt, because it creates a situation where it's very hard for a customer ever to catch up. You're always behind. The longer they wait, the further and further behind they get. And if they were not able, did not have the means to pay the debt originally, that's a problem, because now they're really in, they could have started by owing you $80 and now they owe you $800. They weren't able to pay the 80, so now how are we ever gonna get the 800? So that isn't an issue, and when we look at the receivables for neighborhood services fund, some portion of that is interest compounded upon debts, and the city is carrying that forward. Now, they're not carrying it as an asset, I don't know, you jump in if I don't get this correct. They don't ever expect to get that money, so unlike a private business that carries a receivable, it says it has a value. If the city hopes to get those debts, but it doesn't count on getting those debts. So they may or they may not get some part or all of that money, and that would be windfall because they're not counting it. It's not an asset that they're holding on to, like a private company would say, my receivable is an important asset. I carry that receivable, I expect to get it. And if I don't get it, it's gonna affect my balance sheet because I'm carrying that around. The city has long ago not adopted, and that's actually pretty standard also. When you end the year, whatever you're owed, it'd be nice to get it in the future, but you don't have an expectation of getting it. You carry the number and you hope to get some part or all of that debt. But what the city also said at the last meeting was, that's probably unrealistic with the neighborhood services fund. And this is where that rub comes from several years ago. That number of receivable, some part of it is very valid and very possible that they will collect it. But some part of it is just historic and probably shouldn't be carried anymore because there's no chance of collecting it, none. It's not a realistic debt that they're walking around with, nor are they using it as an asset. They're not saying that they're doing it. They're just carrying it on a sort of a separate schedule saying, here's the number, here's the number. But from your concern, because I know the board has showed some significant concern about receivables in the neighborhood services fund, I think trying to figure out what's real, what's not real, and how much of it is penalty versus, let's say, principal, is a big difference. And I assume the city has all that information, but when you look at that larger number, and you were here, the number has gone back to where it was. They had a good year and then it's back in a bad year. So it's large again. But the question is that even a realistic number? I know they're carrying it, but it's an interesting philosophical and policy question. But I didn't really understand it that well until the last meeting. They did a good job of explaining it. I want to make sure you all saw it. What I saw the last meeting.
I think you need clarification from our auditors, because our auditors do.
Well, they do carry it on the balance
But
sheet.
they also write some of it off, so we might need to get clarification.
Well, one of the things that Brian said is that there needs to be a discussion about how much of that is realistic and how much of that should be written off.
But
Because it's just, they're not necessarily all good debts.
Kathy,
Jeff, we were talking with a consultant about this in, the private sector.
Okay,
And what we were told was that if debt was collected, and I forget whether it was within the first, if it was not collected within the first 60 or 90 days, it dropped from 71% collectible to 54% collectible.
I think
So that if you had accounts receivable, you knew that that number really had to be multiplied by that factor.
Yeah.
Is there anything similar in municipal government?
I think what you're talking about is the success rate of collecting bad debts.
Yes,
So the answer is if you hire an outside debt collection agency, and some municipalities do, there are outside debt collection agencies that work for municipalities.
Yeah.
To collect things like outstanding utility debts, or
Yeah.
in this case sanitation fees. They will give you a similar schedule where they say, well, we will promise to be this successful over this period of time. As part of our contract for services. But the city has always done the collection, to the best of my knowledge, in-house. You have people that are doing.
We have attorneys. that are-
Yeah, so they're not using a service.
yeah.
There are
to
two
do it.
attorneys, one attorney doing the collections and another attorney doing
The leads.
the lanes.
So I mean, they're doing it, they have, in essence, they have an in-house collections department.
Yeah, but it would be interesting to know.
I don't know
if
what
they
their
write off
success rate is.
25% of it or 30% of it, because it caused me to look at an accounts receivable figure over 120 days a lot differently than I did before I heard the statistic.
I think there is, as I wanted to be clear, there is some portion of that receivable that is very real and very genuine.
Yeah.
And the city is doing it, and they should collect it, they should anticipate getting it. There is some other portion, and I have no idea as I sit here, which maybe is older and less reliable and diminishes the value of the larger number to something more realistic. But it's hard to say what the difference between the two is. I don't know what the difference, I know that Mr. Grover had strong opinions about the quality of the debts. And some of it was very, was good, and they should be getting those. He talked about commercial customers who should pay their debts that are behind, but then he also said there are some debts which are not so good. I just don't know the difference, as I said.
And I think maybe with the Munis system, maybe they have something like an aging report that we could look at.
Assume they do.
Well, we had an aging report in the old system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
point that out, because I know it's an important issue.
Yeah,
But we did have one.
And I'm sure Brian would come back at some point and talk more about it, because I know it's an issue that the board is very concerned about, which is the large outstanding receivable to neighborhood service.
But I'm not exactly sure Brian's the exact right person.
Maybe not.
Maybe we have Ware and Ritter come with Brian, not
That'd
that
be-
Brian doesn't know everything,
No.
but he has to rely on his CPAs because they do almost full accrual, so they have to.
They
account-
do a conversion.
Right,
We
they have
talked
to
a
do
little
a
bit about
conversion at
that.
the end of the year, so.
Right.
So they may account for things slightly different, so it'd be
They
good
might.
to have their input. It'd also be good to, just do a general analysis of the situation, but at
Sure.
this point, we, are not at liberty to do that because we don't have a staff. But we hope that maybe something. we
Quite
can-
possibly that plays into it. It's
I've looked at,
very
I've
intensive to
looked at
figure
doing
out.
it privately, because I think that they're more aggressive than they, but then there's a concern about. Well, for commercial in particular, but there's some concern about, private individuals being harassed, and I get that.
yeah.
But
And-
they have, I know when I was borough manager, I used a private company.
Sure, no,
I also shut water off, but, not because I wanted it, was the municipality's policy.
That's
but
right.
we-
and
of course,
as
gotta
we
do
talked
that.
in the past, if you have utilities that are easy to disconnect or painful, but have a switch on,
It's usually a threat, though.
it's a threat,
Yeah,
but that the city of Harrisburg no longer has those tools, in its toolbox. So
but there is part of the ARPA money that it,
I hope.
Yeah, but that's
Remain-
just for the,
Yeah.
for senior citizens
Right.
and very low to moderate income individuals that meet the federal poverty.
but
level.
it still will flow
It's $1 million.
through back to the city, so that's
Yes.
a good way.
Oh, yeah, it's
to
it's a
deal with
good
that.
win-win, and we're lucky that it's in the ARPA legislation because, it almost looks like we're paying ourselves, but since it's permitted, since there were concerns during ARPA that, the situation with utility bills were complex because you couldn't just turn somebody's utility off while they're in the middle of the pandemic, so.
Good point too, Jeffrey.
I think my 2 points was the policy of, it was
Okay.
both about the same issue, thank you, Madam
Okay.
Chair. It was about the fact that it's compounding, so it grows. And second, not all of it is necessarily good debts, some of it is maybe bad debts.
So now I'll turn it over to you for in the weeds, our finances.
Our finances do not have those, because we are small and mighty. Okay, so we do have, but you did not receive, but I'll tell you about it. The bills paid report for August 23rd. It was a very standard month for bills paid. We started the period with the typical fashion and ended with $124,229 in our FNB checking account, which is more than adequate for our needs. And FNB has given us year-to-date $18.28 in interest. So thank you to FNB Bank. But there were no extraordinary or unusual bills that we paid. It was our typical internet and our pursuit, co-working and habitation in Harrisburg, our legal advertisement, a Johnson Duffy invoice and authority manager invoice. So fairly typical month for the authority. So once again, I apologize for not sending that out in advance. But that is all I have in terms of our financial.
Okay. Any other business, from board members? Then Jeffrey, I'll turn it over to you for public
We
comment.
do have a few people in the audience, two guests from DCD. Are there anything you'd like to offer? Well, we always appreciate both of you coming to our meetings, for however long you still come. So thank you very much. Brian? I'm good. You're good, okay, thank you for coming here. We do have a member of the public. They do not have any questions, Madam Chair.
Excellent. In that case, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And we don't need a second, so we're off.
Okay, 4:36.
Thank you, everyone. I think that might be a record.